Okay, I think we can start and people will join later on. So as you notice, today we have the third community of practice that come to develop on the two previous implemented that were focused specifically on the Excel-based tools and investor deck. Meanwhile, we also had a session on effective communication where we had the chance to exchange a different pitch among the projects and investment concept developed and under development. The purpose of the session today is to enter into more detail about the two tools and specifically reply to some questions and give some more information according to the private requests we have received in the past month from municipalities that challenged themselves to use this tool. So to help them understand better what were the different approaches. And moreover, we will see together how 3 case studies to guide you in the effective implementation and how to significantly use these different tools. But before entering into the topic, let's start with Anke Moller that will give you an overview of the project and kickstart this session. So Anke, you can proceed.
Thank you, Dora. 1 sec. I will start my screen, share my screen, and go in PowerPoint mode. Wait 1 second. Yes, you see the presenter mode or?
No, we see the screen mode. You have to switch the screens. Display settings. Display settings.
Yes, it's hiding. That's why. Okay, voila, that's now working. So first of all, sorry for this. Welcome everybody, also from my side. So my name is Anke Moller, as Dora just said. I work at Energy Cities, and we are the coordinator of the European City Facility. Today, I want to do just a brief introduction to put these events we did in the past and today a little bit in perspective into for the EUCF objectives, and also ask for some of your input that is just crucial for us in order to develop the next steps to increase the capacity building from your side, on your side. I won't be long. I only have this 1 slide and then a few questions to you, but basically just to put this into perspective, why are we here? Why are you here? You all have developed investment concept and recently submitted them. Some of you are still working on them, especially when you're from the 4th call. You are still working on the investment concept and will submit in the coming months. So you all have gone through this exercise, which is the main core part of the EUCF, and the main objective of the EUCF was and is still to build a substantial pipeline of sustainable energy investment projects. So you are really the backbone of our project. You are the ones that we need to make this goal happen, and the aim is that we do have these sustainable energy investment projects in the end. So you have started, or you have developed the investment concepts. They were validated in most of your cases, but then of course you have to go 1 step further and implement these investments. As you know, we started in 2019 with 4 calls already, and we have luckily the opportunity to continue the EUCF until 2027. By that time, we will have supported more than 400 investment concepts. That's the goal. So you are one of them. The aim is to trigger by this more than 440 million euros of public and private financing. And also, and this is very important, we want to increase the capacity of more than 800 municipal staff. So this is so crucial. That is why it's so crucial to be in these kind of events of the EUCF, to increase your capacity to develop and implement such investment concepts and to receive more technical support also from our side. And by this, of course, in the end, this should facilitate the uptake of your investment concepts to be implemented and then get further access to finance. So this, I think, is the purpose why we are doing these events and also the main objectives we want to achieve on the EUCF side. So as Dora said, we did a few events in the past, mainly on these 2 tools that we will further detail today and explain more about, also about questions you have. So Gianni will carry on with this. and give you more explanations and also do some practical exercises. So I think that's very interesting. But what's coming next, we really need your input for what's coming next, basically, because we want to, of course, provide further capacity capacity to you, especially for the municipal staff, and to increase your knowledge on the financing aspect, on the financing sources you can seek, etc. So for this, I have prepared a little slide with only 2 questions, so it's not very long. So I would like to ask you to go to the slido.com website, which I guess you all are familiar with from previous and other events you have joined. And then there's the code, which is mentioned on the slide. And also you have the QR code that you can use if you use it on your phone. So I give you 1 sec to join the site. And to look at this. I think that's okay. I will go to the first question. It's to ask you, what support do you need from us in addition to what you have already heard to implement your investment project? So this is from the eyes of the municipality. So if you're a consultant, external expert working for your municipality here in the room, then think about what your municipality you are working with, what they would need in addition. So you have to facilitate access to public funding, to facilitate access to private financing sources. Now it's all going around to better understand the financial implications of my investment concept. So what do the figures mean? What does it mean for me as a municipality? I would like to have more networking opportunities, get more legal advice, for example, how to set up public procurements or others. And then other, if you do feel an other, or if you want to be more precise on your wishes, I mean, I invite you to drop us an email just after the event to be precise what you actually need on top. So if your need is not listed here, I mean, it's not many options, of course, or if you want to be more precise, feel free to drop us an email on this. So I can see the main interest is how to access public funding, followed by private financing sources, and then also to better understand the financial implication, which fits quite nicely, I think, with today's exercise, where we will, of course, enlighten you more on the tools and on the, how to fill it in and what it means. All right, I will stop here and I go to the, still someone filling in.
Maybe okay, just give
Yes.
2 minutes, 1 minute, because I think we have 12 and we are at least 20. It would be like to see more participation, just to take advantage of all the participants that are here. So we would like to invite everyone that has not participated yet to really pick up his or her phone, or just put slido.com and put the code and just participate in this short poll, but it's quite important for us and to know what are your needs, what your needs are.
We will use this information to structure the current. So this is not the only activity we do to ask about your needs and wishes. We of course have other contexts, but this was an opportunity to start the discussion about it. So yes. Yeah, it's not moving anymore though. Yeah, one more. But it's clear the facilitate access to public funding is one of the key points, followed by the financial implications of my investment concept. All right. And if you are one of the few that ticked others, then please drop us an email or put in the chat what this could be, so we can further follow up on this. I will now change slides though. We have 16 respondents. Yes, I'll change. So the second and last question is, what do you consider your main challenge for implementing your investment concept? So once you have now drafted it and submitted it, what will be your really main challenge to to tackle once you have finished this concept? What is the first step you have to do where you think this is so challenging? I don't know how to go about it. Feel free to type in whatever comes to your mind. This is an open question. To get funding, that I guess is a common one. I can see 4 participants typing. Maybe some others want to type as well. Governance, commitment of all partners. Tools, find the proper financing, stakeholder engagement. Member approval, flexible for different in, can't read this, ESG metrics. To get funding seems to be the main one, but that's, I guess, why you are here. So that's not surprising. All right, any more? See, one is still typing. Two more typing. I'll give you 20 more seconds and then I'll stop here. Watching my watch. All right, 5 seconds left. I think we have some good ideas. I think we stop here. We have quite many ideas that we can do. I will stop sharing. I will therefore also stop the Slido. Thank you for your attention, and I'll hand over to Jenny, who will continue from here.
Thank you very much, Anke, Dora. Good morning, everyone. Probably you met us in the previous session, Giovanni, Eduardo, and I. My name is Álvaro Salamanca, project manager at GNE Finance. Giovanni is the head of structured funding in GNE Finance, and Eduardo is the senior analyst one of the senior analysts of GNE Finance. The objectives of this session are regarding all the feedback, all the communication we had with you in the previous months after the 2 webinars we had in March and April. And also, well, first of all, we want to thank you for all this communication, for all this proactivity you have after these webinars. As we told you in those sessions, we created an Excel-based tool, an investor deck, very generic for all projects. And we asked you in that moment for this communication in order to improve it, in order to meet in a better way your projects, because maybe this Excel-based tool should be updated. And that's what happened. Today, Today we categorize this session in different parts. The first one is going to be in the regard of translating to all of you all the feedback we receive, all the common dots, different questions, and all these questions, all this feedback is directly related to the updated version of the Excel-based tool. But don't worry, we didn't change too many things. We only created some new features of the tool in order to provide you a better knowledge, and in order to provide you better explanations when you are funding your projects with 100% of public funding sources. When we created this tool, we were thinking that most of you wanted to reach private funding sources, and some of the outputs of the tool were not wrong, but were focused on equity investors. So after these 2 months, having this communication with you, we changed minimal parts of the tool, and we indicated with more detail which outputs are not useful depending on your project. After the explaining of the update of the Excel-based tool, we will go with 4 practical exercises. Sorry, Dora, because we communicated you that there were going to be 3 practical exercises, but in the end are going to be 4 practical exercises. And then after all the session, we will tell you how to update the investor deck. Also, there are minimal changes. And in the end of the session, how to deal with potential funding scenarios. I mean, if you are a project that it's planning to fund your project with 100% of public funded sources, we will recommend you why you have to fund your project like this. And depending if you are planning your project with equity or with debt, we will give you the solution, the explanation to deal with this kind of investments. Also, we prepare in each part of the session, we prepare one part for Q&A. I thought that we were going to have here this Q&A section in the Zoom, in this tool, but I'm seeing that we have only this chat, but in the end it's the same. You are able to write on the chat. So during the whole session, when you are having questions, you can put your questions in the chat. Eduardo is going to take into account all these questions. Some of those questions are going to be answered in the very first moment, if they are easy or not easy, simple, sorry, short questions with short answers. Eduardo will provide you the answer of those questions in that moment. But if those questions we consider that they need more explanation and it's interesting for the topics we are talking about in the webinar, then Giovanni will explain the answer to these questions. Okay, first of all, feedback, common doubts, and received questions. We were dealing with different country experts. We were talking with different project coordinators, with different municipalities, as I explained in the beginning, and we received different questions, different feedback that most of the times were related to other questions that other colleagues of you arise in that moment. So in this part of the session, we summarized 5 questions. We summarized 5 questions, five topics you raised in these 2 months, and Giovanni is going to explain them. The 2 first questions are related to the model, how this model can help you, and I believe that all the answers you provide in the slide 10 minutes ago are related to all the topics we are going to talk in this webinar. Also, you raised again the question about how to deal with multiple projects. Some of you have one single project per investment concept, but some of you have different projects reaching different or trying to reach different funding sources. So Giovanni will explain again how to deal with this kind of projects, what to do with them, with the Excel-based tool, and so on. Also, we discovered that some of your projects, some of your Excel-based tool had different problems with the outputs, because as it's explained in the Excel-based tool, some of your sectors need to complete in the Excel-based tool the square meters. So Giovanni will provide you again an explanation about these sectors that you have to complete this cell regarding the square meters. Also, we receive a question asking about the discount rate and the WACC. In our model, we are using the WACC. Giovanni will explain why we are using the WACC, and then during the business cases, the practical exercises, we will develop with you. We will show you where is located this WACC and in which projects is not a meaningful output. And finishing this part, we had an Excel-based tool, an investment concept, where the CapEx included a negative number. And in this tool, we are not considering CapEx a negative number. It was regarding that this municipality was talking about some investments, and also Giovanni is going to explain you what to do with different investments. If these investments are producing revenues, or those investments are only reducing your cost, and in the end, how this savings, and then how these savings are related to the ESG metrics. The final part of this feedback topic of the workshop, the final part, are directly linked with the next part, with the update of the tool. So I give you the floor, Giovanni, and you can start, please.
Okay. Good morning to everybody, and thanks, Alvaro and Anke, for your formal introduction. So welcome to everybody to attend this workshop meeting, aimed to, as Alvaro said, to give you more color and hints and summarize the experience we got from these first months working with you, and acknowledging your suggestion and request that led us to produce an enhanced version of the model that can be, addressing all the issues that you highlighted to us. And we thank you for this. So one of the elements that we were focusing on particularly is one question where was asked how this model can help in sharing data with various departments and make it accessible to end users. So here, once again, the possibility of the model to attract more investors, to highlight and promote at best your projects, is a way that led us to produce a tool and to summarize complex information or very different information in a way that is clear, concise, and available also for non-finance experts, in a way that you can share the data within your departments. You can involve different stakeholders having the more or less finance background, but put in a position to understand what are the pros and the cons of your projects and how it works, and what will be the impact in terms of ESG metrics, and as well as financial metrics. So this is conceived to give you an easier comprehension of the concept and to standardize the project characteristics, because the initial goal of this was to produce a tool able to evaluate, or at least consider, the elements coming from very different projects from many different countries, each one with its peculiarities. And this is an exercise that we deem to have done in a way to accomplish your request, and to, of course, improve them as soon as we receive new inputs, but also with this view to be the more broader possible. And so this was also driving our choices in metrics, in technology, and in a presentation of the various projects. So that is our focus, to also to permit you to raise the necessary capital to fund your projects in a best way. So let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, we had another question coming from some of you asking how to manage single projects versus multiple projects. Our suggestion is to see how it can deal with multiple projects. Is the best way is to have an Excel-based tool per project and one investor's debt per project. This because in this way we can help investors to focus only simple and concise information. That's our main purpose, no? To attract more investors possible in your projects. And investors are typically people having a very low time and requiring information comprehensive, not too much extended, but in a summarized way and in a clean way. So few information and focused. So that's why we prefer to have one project, one investor deck, one Excel tool, one investor deck. Of course, if you have multiple projects asking for the same funding source, you may pull together because you're gonna target one type of investor, one type of debt providers. But when you have to diversify your funding sources, it's better that you tailor-made your presentation to every single sub-project. So that's why we had this differentiation. Okay, so another question was concerning the square meters. Yeah, the square meters, because we noticed that some of your projects presented weird numbers, and it was the way that was not producing good figures because the square meters inputs was not provided. And so these projects requiring square meters are non-residential buildings, residential buildings, public buildings, building integrated energy systems, and district heating and cooling, because these metrics may affect various ESG KPIs. And you can imagine, because district heating and cooling, the wider the surface and the volume to heat or cool, the higher the requirements of energy or the efficiency gain in using more efficient heating systems. And this is a metric that you have to be put in the assumption tab. Let's go. Okay, difference between discount rate and WACC. Discount rate is a measure used when you have to do a cash flow analysis, a discounting cash flow. So it's an interest rate used to discount future cash flow. It is a measure that can be customized factors that is tailor-made for specific project. So this, once again, is a little bit against our principle of standardizing the measure and cover the higher possible number of projects. So that's why we prefer to use the WACC. WACC is the average cost of financing for a company with private sources. It considers both equity and debt capital component, and it is weighted for their share of capital structure, meaning that the proportion of each component of funding, debt and equity, is weighting the cost of that source. So there is a cost of debt, meaning the interest rate you pay on your loans, and the cost of equity is desired remuneration of equity investors. So comparing these figures and weighting them, we get this measure, this WACC, and this WACC is used to discount the future cash flow. And this is a standardized KPI, permit an objective valuation, because you know the percentage of funding, you know the cost of funding, fine, it's objective, and is applicable to a wide number of projects, except those funded with public sources only, because whenever we don't have equity investor, it's not possible to calculate that. And so with public sources only, there is no cost of debt nor equity because it's private sources.
Giovanni, in this part, I want to do a reminder. One of the updates of the tool, as I told you, are minimum updates.
Yeah.
In the past, there was a number of WACC when the project was funded with public sources, but only with public sources. But this number was not meaningful.
Yeah.
So in this regard, one of the updates we will show you later. One of the updates is that when this number is not meaningful, depending on the private funding structure, now we are showing in the tool that this number is not meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, to come back to the what you formerly said about negative capex. Now we explain why we cannot have negative capex. So negative capex for us is investments, and investment has to be either zero for projects we don't have an investment at all, or positive. So we have investments in place. And the point is, if the investments can produce the savings, how can we handle different savings? So it depends. It depends whether for savings, we intend that the investment produce revenues. Okay, this revenues is a positive component of income. And so, for example, is the sale of surplus energy. Yeah, put a new power plant, a new photovoltaic plant on your roof. For self-consumption, the surplus energy you don't use, you can sell. So this is an additional revenue source and has to be put in assumption revenue tab, like in any additional source of revenues. They sell any component, any goods, any service. Or if the savings are reducing your cost, because, for example, you have put in place a more efficient equipment to for I don't know, heating or cooling and whatever, and your energy bill is lower than it was before the investment, you already put in the OPEX tab, because in the OPEX tab, you put your cost expectation that if your energy bill was, let's say, 1 million per year before the investments, and now after the investment is 600,000 euro, you put 600,000 euros. So that factor is already incorporated in a lower cost that on a PL, on a profit loss statement, will have an impact, but is not an impact of the investment. Is a, you know, is not requiring a lower investment. The investment is the investment, because you have spent 10 million to buy the new plant or new equipment. Is you spend 10 million. You don't spend 10 million minus something. You spend the cost of investment, but the investment produces lower costs that you will experience in the future as potential savings. So it has to be done input in the OPEX tab. Next slide.
This is the first step when you are seeing here in this slide, like first step, we are talking the first step in the Excel-based tool.
Yeah,
like Giovanni was explaining, the first step is to see what your savings are doing in your project, if they are producing revenue or they are reducing costs. So the first step is like, okay, I have these savings, I know the savings, and I have to go to one of those of the two assumptions tab regarding the revenues and the cost. So this is the first step. You fill in the data in this assumptions tab, depending of which kind of investment, and then maybe you're asking, okay, you're asking yourself, okay, but I have a saving, and this saving sometimes we are talking about an energy saving. Do this saving is linked to the ESG metrics I'm obtaining? Maybe. If this for energy, yes. If not, we are going to see the second step regarding which kind of saving you are having.
Yeah, and so we come to the second step. Then, which kind of energy saving? Which are savings? So if the savings are energy savings, they are automatically calculated in the Excel tool under scenario 1. That is automatically generating the ESG impact of this kind of saving. But we introduced, to accomplish some of you, that we may have different calculation other than the metrics we are using here. You can introduce your own calculation, because if you deem that calculated another methodology and to highlight what in your view should be the energy savings, that's fine. We have introduced the possibility for you to introduce this kind of metrics and then explain in the ESG table of besides the metrics that are produced by the model, also your metrics. And so this is an additional way to present alternatives and comparable figures. And if the savings on the other side are referring to, savings in salaries, in good supplies and maintenance costs and whatever, it is already factorized. So you have not to do anything at all, because the model, it produces automatically the impact when you, like in the last time, we see that the cost saving is reflected in the OPEX side. So when you put the OPEX side, you already put the figures net of the savings you achieved. So it is automatically included in the model as well. So
yeah, most important topic here when you are seeing, oh, there is a new feature in the tool. The most important thing here is that this we are going to talk about this new feature in the tool in the next chapter, but it means that in the end nothing is changing. Nothing is changing. We are explaining you this slide just to tell you that savings, we are considering savings in the tool. Of course, you have to put this if they are producing revenues or they are reducing the cost, like in the first step Giovanni explained. But in the end, the tool is calculating. The tool has different formulas to calculate the energy savings. So nothing changed. If you remember, in the financial and ESG metrics tab, you have the ESG metrics outputs. So it continues being like this. The only difference now is that we created a different column, in order to allow you to put your calculations. If you did your calculations, you made your calculation with a different tool, now you have the opportunity to put in the Excel-based tool a second scenario. And this topic, it will help you to show your investors, to show public authorities, to show different entities interested in your project, that you calculated two scenarios, that you have two kind of scenarios. Maybe one of them is a really positive scenario, maybe the other one is not too positive, but you are calculating two scenarios. And now we are allowing you to include it in the Excel-based tool. Okay, I'm going to read some questions we are receiving, and Eduardo is answering. The first question was, is it compulsory to use the Excel-based tool and the investor deck, or we can use similar but unmade? For you, for municipalities from the first call to the fourth call, is not mandatory. As we told you, it's not mandatory, but we recommend you to use these tools. Also, if you are using different tools to obtain different outputs, to obtain the IRR, the NPV, payback period, all these ESG metrics, we encourage you to use two scenarios always. When you present your projects to different potential funding sources, okay, now you have two tools, your own tool and our tool. And nothing means that your tool is better or our tool is the best one in the world. In the end, are tools to foresee different outputs, and in the end, after some years, all these tools are like business model tools, financial model tools, and no tool in the world is always providing or predicting the future with 100% of confidentiality. So if you have different tools, use our tool and your tool, and provide to the potential funding sources an investor deck or a business model plan with two scenarios. If it's going to be really attractive for these potential funding sources, seeing that you calculated the things in different ways with different scenarios, just put it in your investor deck or in your documentation, and then if they are showing interest on your project, then you can explain them, okay, we obtained these outputs with this tool, look at this tool, and we obtained the outputs of the scenario 2 with the other tool. And also a reminder, our tool is not mandatory, but our recommendation is to use the tool. In the end, everything is automatically calculated, and if you have your own tool with your own inputs, it's gonna be 10-15 minutes to fill in our tool. More questions. Okay, how do you determine the square meters of a district heating network? Eduardo answered this question. Where is the answer? Like, determining the square meters of a district heating network typically involves assessing the surface. I'm not reading here, sorry. of the network components, such as pipes, insulation, and associated infrastructure. More questions we have for the moment. Silly question? No, there are no silly questions. Luis, there are no silly questions. Where do we get this tool and investor deck form? It's in your FMP portal. Until today, you are going to have there the old tool, the Excel-based tool. This tool is not wrong. It's not wrong, but you will see how the different outputs are changing. The explanation of different outputs are changing with the new tool. So until today is the last day where you will have the old tool, but from, I don't know if it's going to be from today or from Monday, you will have ready the new tool to download. If you started to work with the old tool and you are not having problems, you are funding your project with part of equity or debt, okay, continue with this tool. If you didn't upload the tool, if you didn't start working with the tool, our recommendation is to use the new tool. What else? I think there are no more questions. No, Eduardo?
No. Yeah, that's all, Alvaro.
Okay, we continue with the chat open. So continue with your question in any moment, and we will answer them. Also, like in the last webinars, maybe now you don't have any question. If it happened like in the other webinars, Dora is going to be in contact with you, and you can raise your questions. You can ask us through email, through different channels, through the help desk, etc. Okay, we start with the next part. We are going to explain you the update of the Excel-based tool. You're going to see that the update is minimum. As I was saying, this is not mandatory. The old version is right. But our recommendation is that if you're funding your project, I repeat again, sorry, because I'm going to be repeating many messages many times in this session. If you are funding your project or you are planning to fund it with 100% of public funded sources, our recommendation is that use the new tool. Use the new tool, not because the calculations are wrong, because in the new tool, we are explaining why those calculations you calculate in the past for 100% of public funding sources were weird, because the tool was planned in the beginning just for us to have access to private equity, to debt, etc. Also, another reminder, we updated this tool with your feedback. With all the topics you raise in that moment, and all the updates you are going to see are regarding to help you, are in the regard of helping you. In this part, we are going to explain. Okay, we are going to explain. First part, ESG assumptions and ESG metrics. As you can remember, we finished this part saying that we updated the financial and ESG metrics tab. So instead of starting from the beginning of the tool, we are going to link first the session, this part of the session, with the last part of the feedback we receive, or the questions we receive. So first of all, we are going to talk about a new tab we added, just an informative tab, and the financial and ESG metrics tab. Then you municipalities that plan to fund your projects with 100% of public funding sources, you were asking us why I'm obtaining a really big number in the IRR, in the equity IRR. It was because the tool was planned for equity investors. So in this regard, we created a new IRR. Now you are having in the tool equity IRR. It's only working with when you are planning equity in your project and the project IRR. The project IRR is not taking into account any relationship with investors, and it's only the IRR of your project. And it's available, it's working for all the cases, all the situations you can foresee for your projects. And then we updated the assumptions tab. The assumptions tab, the first tab of all, the main tab, like the philosopher stone of the Excel-based tool, where from this part, everything is working later. We updated this tab because you asked us for some changes in this tab, and also we updated a box you had in this tab. We updated it with more information to provide you more knowledge about how the tool is working and about how you have to fill the assumptions tab. So, Giovanni, the floor is yours.
Okay. So thank you, Alvaro. The first change is basically reflecting the new tab that we added in ESG assumption, because some of you asked the possibility to see which were our assumptions that were based our evaluation and the model generation of ESG metrics. So we have disclosed this, and we have put in besides the result and the default assumptions, and we have assumed that you can see and play with it. So you can also change the data, so not only see, but change data, and changing that will produce changes in the metrics KPIs, in the ESG KPIs. So this is an increased possibility for you to manage with your own assumption, regardless of the fact that, as we said before, you can also add your metrics calculated in a different way as a scenario 2. This is affected scenario 1, that is the model generated KPIs. So, and this is explained there in this figure. In scenario 1, the figures are provided by the tool using either our standard assumption or the assumption that we have put by changing the figures as explained before. So you change, for example, the energy price, fine. Our standard value is 0.124, which is reflecting the specific country in our view. But since you know that energy price is volatile and changes, you may wish to, consider a different price considering the recent evolution of price in market. It's fine. You can get it. You should change, and you will produce a change in ESG metric corresponding. So in the scenario 1, the figures of energy savings will be adjusted on the basis of the effective energy price that you have put. So the column 2 in scenario 2, once again, is not mandatory because you can have it or not. But if you have it, and if you wish your investors to know, you can add there, and you get it, and you have comparison between the KPIs provided by the tool and your own KPIs. You can fill it manually. There are free cells. It's like a notebook where you can put your value and your number. And you facilitate the comparison of different scenarios and provide alternatives, as we said. Next slide. Okay, this is other feature that we have added, as Alvaro said before. So equity IRR was already present in the old version, but was not present in the IRR of the project. Why? Because indeed the equity IRR, as the name, is the yield, is the measure of profitability that is reflecting the equity investment. But we know that it can be also projects where there is no equity investment because of, for example, funded via pure funding sources, public funding sources, and without equity investors in place. So, and that was the same situation in which we said before that some metrics are not meaningful. So for this kind of situation, what can be a common metrics? The common metrics is the IRR of the project, because the project generates on one side investments, and so let's say expenses and cash outflows, and on the other side, it will be revenues generated or savings or whatever. And so it will be offsetting the costs and the expenses and the outflows necessary to implement the investments with some positive cash flows. And these metrics, the IRR of the project, regardless the fact on which kind of funding sources is used, either public sources or private sources, for which the equity IRR can be also combined. But here, the IRR of the project is a metric of the profitability of the investments, regardless the funding sources, which is, once again, standardizing the KPIs to reflect the possibility to evaluate different kind of projects. So all type of projects can present the IRR of the project, and so you can evaluate projects with or without equity investment, and this internal rate of return of the project. And also, once again, is automatically calculated by the tool. And so you will have, for example, here, the combination, the project IRR and the equity internal IRR. Why can be higher? Because the equity IRR can be deployed with a combination of funding tools by providing equity investors, a portion, and debt investors. Typically, as debt investors are cheaper than equity investors in terms of cost of funding, so when the lower portion of the funding sources is represented by equity, they invest a lower amount, and the proportion of funding sources of the walk between the funding sources provided by equity and funding sources provided by the cheaper source, which is that, permits having a constant internal rate of return of the project to give more revenues and to propose to equity investors a higher remuneration. And so this is the combined metrics of both profitability index. But for sure, the projected internal rate of return is automatically generated as all others, but is always present. While equity internal IRR, it depends, because it depends on the fact that there is or not the presence of equity deployed to fund the project. Project termination. Since we have the remark from some users that the longer term projects were not possible to evaluate, so we extended it from 29 to 50 years. So we deem that 50 years is time long enough to consider even complex projects or longer term projects. And so here the possibility to extend it by adding the 50 years to the assumptions, and all the part of the model PL and index and valuation are automatically reflecting this. So you have not to do anything but put the new number in the assumption that is almost always automatically generated. In terms of cost of debt, another innovation that we have put following some of your comments and requests was to see the possibility to change the cost of debt, because the model automatically calculates on the basis of country-specific our estimation of cost of debt. But we understand that some of you may have already calculated or negotiated conditions with some lenders that may provide different conditions from those standardized for your region. And so you have now the possibility to change the cost of debt by putting your own figures. As for this country, we assume, for example, to have a standard base cost of 7.87%, but this, for example, you can put 6%, you have cheaper conditions. So, and now you can do it. And it will be reflected in the funding cost and the all metrics and so on. If you wish to maintain it or come back to the old one, we just put plus B46 cell, because that was the cell inside the model that was reflecting the standard and default assumptions. Just in case you change it and now you wish to come back to the former figure. So if you don't know what will be your funding cost, you simply accept the standard and the default assumption. Else, you can change it, as I told you. Here, this the assumption tab change that represent the way Alvaro said before to give you a better impact and better figures and comprehension of what is your capital structure to fund the project. This is the old table that was present in the old file and you are familiar with. Now we have put in place another one which adds to this one, because some of them are already there. So 100, 60, and 40 are already there, but we added the real number of your project, permitting you to know exactly what part of the subsidies, not in percentage, but in real figures, reflect in terms of amount that you fund via each component of public and private sources. So here you will have, for example, subsidies and public funding expressed in percentage of the total amount, which are, for example, 40% of subsidies and 20% of public funding. And here is the effective number calculated applying that percentage to the amount of capex. So if your capex is 56 million something and you calculated 40% of 56 is 22.5 million. And the same for the other figures. And here is just the total of public funding and public subsidies, and is the total of public sources. And this total is the total of all private sources, either equity and debt. In this case, you have just debt and no equity, but should you have both, this total will be the sum of these two components, equity and debt.
Okay, thank you very much, Giovanni. I'm going to summarize all the updates. As I promised, are really simple and easy updates. I'm summarizing this update. You don't have to do anything. And now we are showing you the ESG assumptions we use to calculate the ESG metrics. Now you have the data, and also, as Giovanni explained, you can change this data. For example, if the price of the gasoline is not 1.581 in your country in the moment you are filling in the tool, you can change it. We took some data from the past, from March, April, and we consider all this data you are seeing here is different depending on your country. If you change the country, you will obtain different data. But this tool, in the end, you don't have nothing to do here. Just it's a tool for information. It's a tool. Imagine in the future, an investor and a public authority is asking you, hey, which data you use to do this calculation of the ESG metrics? Okay, we use this data. We use this data, and you can change now the data. Here, the other update is a manual scenario. It's our manual cells where you can put your own calculations. We created it, as Giovanni said, because we received some feedback and we had communication with municipalities that they had calculated the ESG metrics and they had their own scenario. So we took advantage of it to say, okay, if you have two scenarios, show your two scenarios, and then you have in the same Excel you have the two scenarios, and then you can put the two scenarios in your investor's deck or in your business plan. Third update, and is related to one question we are going to answer now. It's an update where you don't have to do anything. It's an update where you are obtaining a new output. This new output is the IRR of the project. And also, if the equity IRR is not relevant for your project, this small new feature you have in the left column, in small new feature, the new feature is that we are saying when you were obtaining these numbers 400% of IRR is because it was not meaningful. Now the new feature is that instead of showing you those numbers, we are saying now it's not meaningful for your project funding structure. Nothing to do. It's automatically generated and you are seeing it now in the financial metrics. This update doesn't mean any significant effort for you, any new effort for you. It's you are having the same cell here to say the project lifetime, the years of your project. And in the past we had 29 years. Now we can put 50 years, 45 years, 40 years, depending. You have to 40 to 50 years now. And the cell continues being the same. It's a manual data entry, nothing changed, just the duration of your project. The cost of the debt. In the end, if you don't know the cost of your debt, you don't have to do anything. In the past, in the old version, you couldn't see the cost of the debt. It was hidden, but we consider interested to show it to you and also to change it, because also we were having communication with different municipalities that they told us, hey, we were negotiating with different banks, we were negotiating the loans, and we know the interest rate for us, and the interest rate for us is not the common one in our country. For example, 7.87. We made a deal with this bank and our cost of the debt now is 5. So now you can change it and you are seeing it. If you are not planning any debt, any loan in your project, don't do anything. You will see this cell, but this cell is not acting in the calculations if you are not planning debt for your project. And here, as I said, the philosopher stone, we are going to continue this webinar workshop coming from this new table. This new table means that we discover you were having problems when you were creating your project funding structure. And for that reason, some of you had weird numbers that you didn't understand why. And after that, after analyzing all your Excel-based tool, we discover that we have to go deeper in the explanation of this table and how this table is produced. So before coming to the business case exercises we plan for you, I'm going to read out loud the questions we were receiving. Giovanni, interrupt me, complete it when you consider it. Dylan Cosi is asking if is there a possibility to know how to prepare different implementation scenarios. Is what we are going to do now. Is what we are going to explain now. The first scenario is going to be split into sub scenarios where we are going to explain how to fill in the Excel-based tool if your project is 100% funding with public funding sources. This is the first scenario we are going to talk, and it's split in 2 scenarios. And also regarding your question, Dylan, this public-private partnership are kind of the other scenarios. We are going to explain. If you are managing your project with public funding sources plus equity, or with public funding sources plus debt, or with everything. If you are planning your project with public funding sources, with equity, and with debt. Those are going to be the remaining scenarios after the first one. Also, you were including in your questions the different discount rates. Giovanni, in each of the scenarios, is going to explain how our discount rate, in this case the WACC, is working with your scenario. And you will see that in some scenarios, in scenario 1A and scenario 1B, where your project is 100 funded with public funding sources, for example, the WACC is not a meaningful output of for your project. Another question we have here regarding the equity IRR, how we calculate public equity IRR. Maybe it was a confusion in the past, and for that reason we created this update. There is not public equity IRR. Only you have equity IRR when you are planning your project with different equity investors, private equity investors. In this regard, we are calculating the equity IRR also in a public-private partnership. But if there is not any public-private partnership, the equity IRR in the model now is showing that it's not meaningful. In the past, we didn't know that we will have too many scenarios, too many municipalities with only 100% of public funding sources, and the number was a number with no sense, with, as I told you, like 300, 400, and it didn't have any meaning. So in this regard, we update this part of the tool to show you when this number is not meaningful.
Yeah, if I may add one little thing on this point. So we have distinguished public sources and private sources also in terms of the feature of being or not redeemable, because as you see in the chart, basically the public sources are considered by us as not redeemable, means that are deployed without any expectation to be refunded, either for grants or subsidies, either for public funding, but simply because the municipality or the government or a public entity decides that that project has a value, an intrinsic value, which is well beyond the possibility to get a return from that investments or a possibility to get the investment back in terms of equity refund. While for private sources, either bank debts or other forms of debts and equity, we assume that lenders and investors sooner or later will require the redemption of the funds they have put, as well as a remuneration for their investments. And that's the fundamental basis of IRR, of the equity IRR, and WACC and all other metrics. And so whenever there is not no possibility for redemption, nor for remuneration, there is a not meaningfulness for the IRR, because the IRR will have to compare negative cash flows with positive cash flows. Positive cash flow can be expressed by dividends or sums that are distributed, and or redemption of the funds invested. So an investor that puts 1 million equity and gets, let's say, 5% dividend each year, he gets 5% dividend every year plus the million invested, or the lower than the invested if the project is not refunded in full, but an equity refund compared and offsetting the equity that invested at time zero or across the investment period. So in that case, being the presence of negative and positive cash flows, is it possible to calculate an IRR? But when there are only negative flows, like the funds invested, and no positive funds redeemed or distributed, so mathematically it's not possible.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni. We are a bit out of time. We have another question. I will let Eduardo to answer it through the chat. And we will continue with the exercises because we have here five exercises and we are out of time. Okay, practical exercises. We will start with this. We will start with the private funding structure. In this box, nothing changed. Nothing changed, but Giovanni is going to explain you first of all how this box is working, what's the meaning of the different hypotheses, the subsidies, the public funding, the equity, and the debt. As we told you in the previous webinars, mathematically, for calculations in this tool and in all tools, because in the end is the same, subsidies, subsidies, and hypothesis public funding are the same for calculations. But we created this differentiation regarding that we are considering subsidies like grants, and public funding, the hypothesis of public funding, the money is coming from your own budget. And then you will have the hypothesis equity and the hypothesis debt. So please, Giovanni, And before giving the floor to Giovanni, sorry, we are going to practice. We are going to practice in the tool all these exercises, and we are going to show you. You will have all the information here in the slides, but after each exercise, Giovanni is going to show it to you in the tool, and then we will come back to the PowerPoint presentation. It's going to be like this during the 5 exercises and this explanation. Thank you, Giovanni. The time is yours.
Thanks, Alvaro. So here we have the comparison between what you see in the assumption tab and the results in your project funding structure, which is the complete table detailing how is your capital structure. So if you have, for example, 60% of the project funded by public sources and 40% funded by private sources, and within this 60%, the 40% is done by subsidies and the 20% is done by public funding, you have to put these numbers in the assumption tab. So 40% of subsidies, 20% of assumption tab, of public funding assumption tab. That will be reflected where? In the table, when saying that subsidies row represents the 40% of your investment, and in terms of amount, we represented 22 million out of the 56 million of capex you have to fund. Similarly, the 20% will be the residual 20% of the public sources out of the 60, and the 11.2 million representing the 20% of the 56 million of capex. So the capex is the amount to fund, and this component are the component through which your project is funded, either in public sources, either in private sources. So this is for the part of public sources. Coming from to the private sources, which is represented by equity and debt, you may have to find out resources to fund the residual 40%, because once you've funded the 60% of public sources, the 40% left to be funded with private sources has to be split between equity and debt. So assume that you have 30% of private equity investors keen to fund your project. You put 30% here, and automatically the system says how much is funded by debt. Of course, if the 40% has to be funded by a mix of equity and debt, and you have only 2 funding sources, if the 30% is funded by equity, 100 minus 30% is 70%. And the 70% is the portion of private sources that has to be funded by debt. In terms of amount, similarly with what we have done with public sources, we will multiply the total amount of capex by the percentage of the capex funded by each component. So it will be 12% of equity and 28% of debt. Why 12 and 28? Because in the funding sources represented by private capital, if we have the 30% of equity, but the 30% of equity is referred to the 40% of funding to cover, because we already funded the 60% with public sources, we multiply 30 per 40 and we get 12% of the total. Okay, so the 12% of 56 million is 6.7 million, and this is the equity component. The residual debt component, it will be what? Is the 70% represented by debt multiplied by 40% of the total private sources that we have funded. Because once again, the 60% of the need is funded by public sources. So the complement to the part of the funding funded by public sources is funded by private sources. And within each category, either public or private, the component residuing after having funded the first one, so if you funded subsidies of 40, you have to do something complementary to fund the 60, no? Because the total is 60. If 40 is funded by subsidies, how much will be funded by public? 20. And so 20 here, 20 here, and 60 is the total 40 plus 20. Similarly, for private sources, if you have funded the first 12% with equity, what will be the residual? 28, because to get 40 minus 12 is 28. Or 70% of that times the 40% of private sources is 28. Once again, 28. So basically, this way, you have a clear picture. You don't have to do anything but to decide which part of sources are you using. Once you decide subsidies, once you decide public funding, once you decide the equity or debt, you put the simple percentage here, and you get automatically all your work done. So this is, I would deem that adding this table would that help you more than having only just the percentage 100, 60, 40, and whatever. Because here you see effectively how the part of your project, the full project of 56, funded by public sources and private sources. And within each category, funded by subsidies and public funding, by equity and debt. Of course, if you have project where you have no equity because you put 0% here and you have 100% of that, this component equity will be 0 because it reflects that instead of having 30% times 40%, you will have 0% times 40%, which is 0, and the full 40, it will be only provided by that. But we will see this more in detail in the Excel model. But here is just to show you how this assumption tab is reflected in the table and what's the purpose of providing you with this table.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. The most important thing here, and it's why Giovanni stopped here to explain this, is because with this table, with the old table showing here example and without numbers, I understood that you were having difficulties to fill in the Excel. So for that reason, we created the table with the amounts, but also we saw the difficulties you were having by creating the table. So the most important thing here is to remind you what Giovanni explained. Subsidies and hypothesis public funding, this percentage is directly the percentage of your project funding structure. It's the same percentage. But the difference here, and for that reason, we understood you were having difficulties. This percentage is not directly the percentage of your private funding structure. Is the percentage of the remaining of the percentage of the 40-20 in this case. So public funding, subsidies, hypothesis subsidies, and hypothesis public funding, this percentage is the percentage of your private funding structure for public sources. And equity and debt is the remaining percentage not funded with public sources. So we wanted to clarify it. I think we will go with Giovanni. Maybe we can go to the first two exercises, and then you do the exercises in the Excel. Okay?
Yes.
Okay.
So
we start with we have for business case 1 we have two cases. The first case is if you are funding your project with a mix of subsidies and a mix of public funding. I will receive the question: subsidies, we are considering subsidies grants, and public funding, hypothesis public funding, we are considering it the money coming from your project, from your budget, from the budget of your department. But as I told you, this calculation, the calculation for the outputs of the model, in the end, subsidies and public funding are considered the same for this calculation. So Giovanni, please go ahead with the first sample.
Okay.
We will explain the slides, Giovanni, and then we will go through the example in the Excel after the two.
Okay, so we go straight to the first two slides, project 1A and 1B, right?
Yeah, 1A, the most important thing is that in this case, hypothesis equity has to be always 0%.
Yeah, exactly. So here we have a situation in which the funding is provided only by public sources. Public sources means no private sources, because it's, you see, 100% public sources, 0% private sources, but within the public sources, we have a mix between subsidies and public funding. So from a calculation standpoint, is nothing different, is from a category and the qualification of the type of funding you are using. As Alvaro said, we have to put 80 here if we deem that to get 80% of subsidies and 20 of funding, public funding, and 0% in equity, regardless the fact that this component is 0, because else the model will not work for its own purposes. So
yeah, like Giovanni is saying, we saw some not mistakes because it was not your fault, but we saw some examples like this, like for example, 80% of subsidies, 20% of public funding, and as the remaining equity and debt in this case is the 100 of 0%, some of you put 100% in equity. This is a reminder. In this model, you know, has a lot of formulas, a lot of calculation, a lot of hidden tabs. This model works in this case. If you want to work in like this business case, you have to put 0% in equity to allow the model working properly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And so in that case, since, as I said before, whenever there is no equity, no private equity, the IRR, equity IRR is not meaningful. So neither the IRR nor the NPV, because the NPV is calculated by WACC, and the WACC in that case is not meaningful because we have no debt and no equity. So these two measures are, and always the payback years, because is reflecting the private equity investors, are not meaningful. But we have the project IRR. So introducing the project IRR will add, in this case, a meaningful KPI that was not possible when in the old version, it was only the equity IRR. Because in this case, we couldn't have had any metrics at all on the project profitability. So this is why we have introduced the project IRR and permitting an objective valuation of the transaction. Of course, the WACC is not meaningful as said, because is referred to absence of both equity and debt. No. The case 1B. The case 1B is similar to the case 1 because it has always the public funding 100%, but in terms of type of funding, the public sources are only referred to public funding. So, for example, procurement. So this case has similarity to the previous one in terms of items or yield, etc., but differently categorization. Again, the equity is always 0 because whenever we have public sources in full, the equity has to be 0. And the debt is automatically set to 100 because it's complement to 1. Here you see is the same because the calculation, the results are the same. Project IRR is the same because it's regardless the fact that they are funded via 80, 20 or 100% public sources, public funding. The other metrics referred to the equity investors are not meaningful, similarly to the previous case.
Okay, Giovanni, could you go to the directly to the Excel, please, and
yes,
share your screen? While Giovanni is centering in the Excel, to Dylan. Yeah, we have this business case. We will go ahead later.
Yeah. So here is the business case where we have put, you see the similar case of the 1A, similar case, it is subsidies and public funding representing the whole percentage, the 100% of the funded amount. And so the CapEx, 56 million, is funded by 80% subsidies and 20% public funding. So we have put 0% equity here. This is automatically set at 100%. But you see, this is the component, the total. This is the part funded with public sources, which is 100% equal to this. And this is the part funded of subsidies. Since we have put 80% here, we will find 80% here, subsidies, and this is the amount funded with subsidies, which is the 80% of 56 million. If we change and we put, for example, 70%, we have to put here the 30% manually. Okay, and so we will change it 70, 30, and of course the two components will change because we have lower amount of subsidies and higher amount of public funding. One thing, just in case we make a mistake and we had public funding set, so we choose 70% of subsidies and 30% public funding, we have introduced here a little control and say this is okay. Why okay? Because the sum of the two is 100%. Okay, so if we by mistake we say, for example, 40, no, subsidies plus public funding shall be lower than 100% or equal. So we cannot put 110% funded with public sources and 10 will be negative funded with debt or equity. It's not possible. It will be a mistake. So please be careful that the sum of these two has to be always the 100%. Okay?
Or in this business case, but
in this business case,
in
yes.
the end, we put this alarm, like always in all business cases, the sum of subsidies and public funding has to be or 100 or less. And
yes.
we put this reminder.
Even zero, because we may have a project funded
it could be zero, yeah, it could be zero, but never more than 100 because it's
never
very
more than
related
100.
to your project funding structure.
Yeah.
And maybe Giovanni, okay, you are going to go with you are going to change to the 100% of public funding, and maybe we can show them later the financial metrics and the valuation tab.
Yeah. No, sorry, subsidy is 0.
Yeah, Giovanni now is with the 1B.
Yeah. 0 subsidies.
Of public funding coming from the
100% of public funding. Okay, so here with the case 1B, we have no subsidies, but everything funded via public funding, like in the procurement. And so this is the case. So in terms of metrics is the same, but is not changing any difference in terms of, so I have to shift this part to get this one. If we go to the financial metrics, it's not meaningful for projects that are funded without equity because we don't have private equity, we just have public debt, and so not meaningful the payback of 0 and not meaningful the public sources in terms of NPV, as we showed before in the presentation. These are the SG metrics and the figures that the free cells that you can put in your model, let's say. For example, this is free for you. Okay, so in the assumption page, you change your assumptions, and the SG metrics, you get the results. I don't know, Alvaro, if you wish to go ahead with the other cases.
Yeah, please stop sharing, Giovanni, and I will
Yeah.
share them. Wait, sorry. Okay, we have more questions, but we will go ahead with the last question when we enter in this business case. But for the moment, business case 2. The business case 2 is when you are planning your project with a percentage of public funding sources and a percentage of equity.
Yeah.
So Giovanni, please.
Yeah. So here we have the assumptions of presence of both public funding sources and percentage of equity. So no debt, but the combination of these two sources. So we have assumed, as before, that we have a 60% of public sources in place. So the same composition of last time, that is 40% with subsidies and 20% of public funding, totaling the 60% of public sources. Of course, how much is the complement, the residual to 100 is 40, because 60% public, 40% private. Within private, how much is funded by equity, how much is debt? We assume to have only private equity, so it will be 100% equity, and automatically the debt is set equal to 0. This is how it model works, and this is always the complement. So the sum must be. All outputs are meaningful. Why? Because now we have the presence of private equity investors. And you see that private equity investors with a project yielding an IRR of 12.50%, which will get an equity IRR of 20%, almost. And the NPV is also possible to calculate because we have the WACC set at 10%. How is 10%? 10% is an assumption that we require, for example, for our equity investors to get a minimum 10% yield on their investments. While the cost of debt, similarly to the cost of debt that we have tailored on the basis of the cost of debt estimated for the nation, for the country, or from the cost of debt that you put, also equity investors have an assumption, or at least an in principle intrinsic threshold out of which, beyond which they are accepting investment or not. So the minimum for us is 10%. And so they will compare. The equity investors will see here that with the project yielding an internal IRR for 12.5%, in that structure, with 40% of funding provided by them and 60% provided by public sources, they will get a 20% return expected. And so here, all outputs are meaningful because all the components necessary to calculate those KPIs are in place.
We go through the Excel to see this,
Yeah.
to see this business case.
Yeah, so we go to the Excel, and go to the Excel, it will be 60, 80, 20, no?
40-20, I remember we used 40-20.
Yeah, 40-20. Where is the, okay, yeah, it's here, it's 40-20. And we have 100% of equity. Okay, so in terms of percentage, 60% with public sources, 33 million, 40% of subsidies equal to 22 million, 20% public funding, 11.3 million, and the rest 100% funded by equity, so 22 million by private equity. If we go to the metrics, you see the 20.27 IRR for equity, private equity investors, and the yield is 12.54. Payback is 9 years, is not 0 as before, but it's meaningful. And you see that the payback will be here when the negative cash flow will become positive. And then the NPV, it will be 38 million. So that's the expectation. similar to what we have shown in the presentation.
Giovanni, before going to the next exercise, I'm receiving private questions.
Yeah.
Asking us if 20% of equity IRR is too much, is not too much. And of course, but remember, we are obtaining this IRR of 20% because we are funding the project with free money. In this case, 60% of public funding sources, subsidies or from budget, is too much money, too much free money, where you don't have to answer about this money, you don't have to pay this money to anyone. So when you have such a big quantity of free money is not a good word, but
it's not redeemable, not redeemable money or
not
money
redeemable,
which
exactly.
there is no expectation of return.
All the investment of private investors is an investment which is going to receive a big IRR, is going to receive a lot of return. No, Giovanni?
Yeah, exactly. So if we have, for example, if we reduce this to 20, for example, you see that the equity will be higher because they were not to deploy 24 million as in the past, 22 million as in the past, but now they have to put 33 million, and those revenues are split on 22 million. So, and here let's go down. That's 16%. Is already more acceptable, but is still 40% of non-redeemable money.
Too much. Yeah, it's still too much.
If we go down to, I don't know, 5%, so 75% funded by equity and 25 by public money, let's see what's happened. Is 14. So it becomes closer and closer to the IRR, project IRR, because here there will be longer payback because they put more money and it takes more time to get back their money. And as well, in terms of remuneration, all the remuneration, while before was split only within a restricted volume or a lower volume of equity investments, so being equal all the revenues and profit generating and potential dividend to be distributed, there were far less investors, no? And so here, when the amount of investors to remunerate is higher and the amounts of revenues to distribute and also to resources to distribute, either into split in terms of dividends and equity refund, is the same. So they shrink and they get lower revenues, of course, and so a lower IRR. So this is why it's important to balance the presence of public funding, private funding, according also to investor expectation. Because if your investors, for example, needs a minimum IRR of 15%, and now in this situation you get only 14, maybe they withdraw, they are not interested because their threshold is higher. And so how to do that? Either you increase the revenues or we get different assumptions. I don't know. We have put here, for example, an assumption changing the annual growth rate. We put 5% for revenues and 3% for cost. You may have a more favorable situation in which your revenues grow for 6% and your costs grow for not for 3 but for 2. Wonderful. You get more revenues and you can ensure higher return. Or they say, guys, if I need at least 15%, your resources is not be so low as 25, but try to increase this one, for example, get more donors or more revenues, and you fund, for example, 30% with public sources and 70% on private. What's happening here? So it's 14, not that much. We need to improve. Okay, so let's go here and up to 30%. So get 50-50. If you get 50-50, now it's better because they go above the 15%. So there is a way to do that. But of course, you will apply it to your internal budget or external resources, donation, and so on, to accomplish investors' requests. So it's a matter of, size the component. And that's why we deem that this tool will help you in find out the optimal balance of sources to fund your project.
Okay, Giovanni, do I go with the business case 3 in the slide?
Yeah.
And then please stop sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, business case 3 is a mix between funding sources, public funding sources, and debt. We receive a question here asking that what's happening if we have a public debt. We have to put as Eduardo answer the question. In the end, it's a debt. So if you have a debt with any public administration, you have to consider this hypothesis of debt. So go ahead, please, Giovanni, with this business case 3, public funding sources and debt, and how to fill in it, and then what outputs we are obtaining.
Yeah. So this is the.
No, but Giovanni, please, first with the slide, and then.
Yeah, sorry.
Don't worry. Too many business cases, too many changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Please take back your presentation.
I'm not sharing.
Oh no, I was disconnecting you because I was starting my Excel.
I didn't know it. Sorry.
Yeah. So good. So here we have the business case 3. Business case 3 is the assumption tab, gives us 60% of funding as usual provided by public sources, split as before in 40 subsidies and 20 public funding. But now the residual funding of 40% is not provided by equity, but just from debt. Okay, so in this case, we will put 0% equity here, and then automatically the system changes the percentage of debt to set 100%. So what in the past was funded in full by equity, now is funded in full by debt. And here we'll see in the model how it works and what produces. So if you go to the metrics, you will see that IRR, public project IRR, is 13%. The payback period is not meaningful because we don't have equity. So why there is a higher IRR? Because the higher IRR is produced by a cheaper funding source, because the component of debt is remunerated at a rate which is lower than the one that we have put for the equity. No? The equity, we have assumed the WACC of 110%, because remember that WACC is weighted average cost of capital. But in case 2, the capital structure for private equity, for private funding, was provided 100% by equity. And if the equity costs minimum 10%, here the WACC is 10% when there is no debt. Here, if we have a debt costing 6.27, then now is 6.27% WACC, because 100% of private sources are provided by debt, and this is the cost of debt. Okay, so I think we can go to the one.
While Giovanni entered in the Excel, we receive another question saying, what if there is equity, but we simply leave 80%, for example, because we don't know what could be the right. For that reason, we are showing you all these exercises. Because maybe when you are creating your business plan, your financial plan, you don't know which one is going to be the right number, or you don't know if you are going to obtain a loan of 100 millions or equity for 50 millions, or maybe you are going to obtain grants or not. For that reason, we consider that all these business cases are really important, because if you haven't decided yet what to do with your project, if you are foreseeing, if you are planning your project, it's important to know what are the difference between different business cases and how to deal with the tool for different business cases. Okay, you can send us the Excel-based tool. Now you have your plan, you send us the business, the Excel-based tool, and we analyze it and we say, okay, your Excel-based tool is right. But what happened if in 2 or 3 months, 4 months, the situation changed? You don't receive the grant you were expecting, or the budget of your municipality changed because, for example, a change of the government. You have to be ready to deal with this situation, with these changes. And of course, you can change your Excel-based tool, your investor deck. You can change everything because you are changing your plan. So you have to change the documentation you are going to show to investors of public authorities. So for this reason, Dylan, you asked that. It's important to understand all the exercises, because sometimes you are not really sure about the future, about what is going to happen in the coming months. And I stop. Sorry, Giovanni, continue with the example in Excel, please.
Yeah. So yeah, we had as said, the 40%, the 60% of sources from public, split in 40% of subsidies and 20% of public funding, as before. But here we just have debt providers filling all the needs for private sources. So no equity investors, but just debt providers. What's happened in the financial ESG metrics? Yes, we have the not meaningful measure for equity IRR, payback period, and this, but we have the project IRR as before, as for 13%. And we have the payback, we have the NPV, because the NPV is calculated on the basis of the WACC. And so, of course, the other ESG metrics are present, either those automatically calculated and the one that you can provide. But this is the situation of this project having only that. So there will be just this one, no equity deployed. And as you say, since the rest of the, let's call public equity, is provided by non-redeemable sources, we don't have basically no refunds of equity provided equity, the investment funded by public sources, because we assume that the public sources are not redeemable. This one, both subsidies and public funding. While that is redeemable, and in fact, the debt repayment is always refunded. So, maybe we can switch to the next one, yeah. In the last case.
Yes. Thank you, Giovanni. Okay, last case is a business case where you mix everything, where you have public funding sources, where you have equity, and where you are planning to get a loan.
Yeah. So here we have assumed basically the same composition of the public sources. So I'll not repeat what we just told before. But here the private sources is represented by two components, both equity and debt. So if we assume that the 30% is provided by equity, is 30% of what? Remember, we have 100% of capex to fund, of which 60% is funded by public sources. Okay, this 30% on what amount is calculated? It has to be calculated as before on the residual 40% to fund. So 30% times 40 is 12. No, 12 here as equity and 28 for that. The metrics, what are the metrics? Of course, there is an equity IRR, which is higher because the amount of equity is lower than before, because we can leverage on funding sources provided by debt. The project IRR, it is a little bit, and there's a payback period very short, 6 years, simply because the amount of equity is very low, You remember only the 30% of residual component of private sources is provided by equity investors, while before it was 100% in the case 2. So here, of course, they having less capital invested by private equity investors, in constant presence of revenues to distribute, they get more revenues for them. And so the return on the capital they invested is higher because they put less money in to receive more money. Okay, the residual IRR of the project is lower because they have to pay also the interest and debt cost on the 70% of funding not provided by other investors, but by debt lenders and debt providers. And they have an NPV of 78. Now the work is a mix between the part of the debt provided by lenders and the equity. So if we go back to the model, it will be the similar situation for public sources, but here we have 30% of equity and 70% of debt. So what we have here, we have 6 million, not that much, 6 million provided by equity and 15 million provided by debt providers, but lenders. Okay, with the 33 million represented with 60% of funding still provided by public sources. If we go on the metrics, that was before. So we got 36% IRR for equity investors, sure, because they get it. They get more revenues, they repay their investments just in 6 years, they pay back time, and the IRR of the project is around 13% with an NPV of 78 million. Okay, ESG metrics as usual. And this is due to the fact that the lower amount invested here. Remember when it was changing before the portion, the component of the funding. So here, if we reduce, for example, this portion to, no, sorry, not 30%, but let's assume to reduce to 20 here. Of course, you will have 60% funding to be provided by private sources, and then things will change. So it's not anymore 38, it's 24, which is still good revenue, but not that much as before.
Great, Giovanni, thank you very much. We are a bit out of time, so we will jump to the next part of the workshop webinar presentation. Are you seeing my screen?
No.
Now?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Okay. After the whole session, of course, you are thinking about the investors deck with all these changes, what's happening with my investor deck, and also Giovanni will provide you some tips to deal with different potential funding scenarios, depending of the business case, depending of the project funding structure of the project of your municipality. Yeah. So in this regard, I will go really fast on the update of the investor deck, and then I will give the floor to Giovanni to explain different situations according to your project funding structure. To the investor deck, in the end, if you are planning to show this document to an investor, you have to call it investor deck. But if you are not going to plan to show this document to any investor, you can call it like a summary of business plan or something like that. But this document, the investor deck, you download, and we explain in the webinar the 3rd of April. We created a template where you could fill in it with all the outputs and the inputs you use in the Excel-based tool. In the end, this investor deck is showing the investors the first information they want to know about your project. Then if they are interested, maybe they will ask for the tool, they will ask for the investment concept, but in the very first moment, investors are receiving 100 projects every day, and they can be reading documents of 100 pages from the first moment. So they are always asking for a document like the investor's deck, where we summarize all the main important outputs we obtained in this Excel-based tool. The only thing is changing from the other investor deck, and it's something you can do in the template. For example, as you saw, we are dealing with projects that are only planning the project funding structure with public sources. In this case, there are some metrics that are not meaningful, are not useful. So we indicated here in this slide what to do with these metrics. For example, with the net present value, if your project is funded with 100 public funding sources, you saw in the Excel-based tool that now you are receiving a message saying that it's not a meaningful output. So simply you can delete it in the investor deck. With the equity IRR, we are in a similar situation. If you are not planning a private equity investors, go to your investor deck and delete the line with the equity IRR. With the project IRR, now we incorporated it for all kind of projects. So incorporate it in the investor deck. Also, you can have in an investor deck the equity IRR and the project IRR, but always in all business cases, you have to incorporate the project IRR. And payback period, you have to take it out when you are not planning any equity investor. It's really short. This update is deleting a line and adding the project IRR. So one of the most important things of the presentation, maybe we will finish like 5-10 minutes later than the time expected, but we consider this part really important. So please, Giovanni, go ahead. And now Giovanni is going to explain you when your project is more secure to go to public sources or to equity or to debt or to a combination of everything. Sorry, before giving the floor to Giovanni, also I forgot it. Sorry, apologize. In the investor deck, you don't have to update the ESG metrics if you don't have 2 scenarios. But remember that at the beginning of the session, we told you that we update the ESG metrics tab, allowing you to enter manually a new scenario. If you have 2 scenarios, put the 2 scenarios in the investor deck. Also with the rest of the outputs, because we received a question today saying, hey, I have another tool and I'm calculating the NPV, the payback period, IRR with a different tool. Our recommendation is that if now you are using 2 tools, you have 2 tools, your own tool and our tool, the EUCF tool, the Excel-based tool, do it with all the investor deck. If you have 2 scenarios, show it to your investors. Show it that you are calculating it with in a really concise way. So now, yes, sorry, Giovanni, I give you the floor for the first business case.
Perfect. So yeah, we have thought to include all this description to explain you or give you some cases where a project may fall in each category to drive you to better understand and use this model. So we see with business case 1A and 1B, remember that are the project funded only with public funding sources, with public sources. So mixed or pure public sources. Which are projects like this? Projects presenting maybe high risk profile or low expected revenues or volatility, random revenues, random elements that can be hard to be predicted and to forecasted and explained and valued by private investors, or other feature that reduce the appealing for them. For example, projects are subject to changing low risk that may reduce their viability. They're not adequately offset by project return, so it means that volatile in the case before, or projects that are structurally not enough or a volatile cash flow. So we have to remember that debt investors like stability, like project cash flow, regular cash flow, to ensure debt service repayment, both interest and principal. Equity investors are typically keen to invest in projects that have high yield, because we have seen that their investment threshold is for projects presenting yields above 10%. So if projects not yielding enough or not producing revenues, but has an importance for the public sector to undertake the investment for other reasons, but it's hard to attract investors because investors want to have money and revenues. Okay, so this is the case 1A and 1B. Then we can go to business case 2. Business case 2 is a mix of public sources and equity. Okay, so it means that projects are those presenting lack of stable cash flow. Remember, I said that debt providers like stability, and if there is no stability of cash flow or high risk profile, it's hard to get debt providers in. While if there is high risk profile and expected revenues in line with private equity investors, it's okay. We may find equity investors keen to invest because although there are cash flow unstable, but the expectational return are high enough for them to decide to invest. And so that our projects represent high risk, high return feature, but not immediate or volatile. For example, cash flows that are unstable or materialize only after long completion periods. So when there is a long completion period, it's difficult to find banks keen to put money in since the beginning. Maybe they put at the halfway or leave, for example, more patient capital to stay in for the period of time which is necessary to put the investment at the level being close to provide revenues. And so at that point, also lenders may have, let's say, a first period of interest-only loans, okay? And then they can provide money, they start complete investment and then rely on the possibility of the project to produce revenues, and only in that case, but not in the beginning, for example. So that's why the possibility to find equity investors are more keen for this kind of project compared to debt funders. Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the opposite, public sources and debt. We have enough cash flows, but cash flows and revenues are not so high. So it's a matter of how yielding are the investment. So we saw that equity investors are people accepting the risk and keeping also higher risk than debt providers, but having in exchange enough revenues compared to the investment threshold. So if the projects are not in this position to generate stable revenues, but not that much to ensure once repaid, because we have to remember the debt providers are paid first compared to the equity investors that are paid junior, no, in the waterfall of payments. So the problem is that the investors may not be that attractive for them, so the project. And so the public sources provide the capital stability of equity investor, but not requiring a high remuneration like a private investor. So, and we can only attract debt providers for private sources because the equity investors are not that attractive. So the equity equivalent has to be put from public sources when the debt can be drawn from private sources. Next. And last, so the mix. This is the most complete situation in which the project have a risk profile which is in line with private source eligible criteria. So not so high to remunerate only equity investors, but is a mix, okay? So, and the cash flows are enough to ensure debt service repayment. So debt funders are happy because they put money, the project can get a cheaper funding, but also are keen to get their money back because they are able projects to produce the revenues to serve the debt. And also to provide adequate remuneration to equity investors. Of course, not 100% or not in full funding between private sources. So we need as well as some refinancing and some financing capacity from public sources. Is a mix, a typical situation of PPPs. And a project payback period is compliant with lenders and investor preferences. So everybody is happy, the project is equilibrated, has a mix of various funding sources, and has also refinancing capacity. This is important in case we need to replace some funding sources, either lenders or equity investors. So if the project is attractive enough, just in case banks should withdraw or reduce their commitment, or equity investors need to exit the project, for example, because for pursue different other different investments, we may find alternatives. We may find new investors step in, but if the project is not enough attractive for them, it would be an issue in that case. And so in that case, it could be necessary to replace that part of equity with additional capital injection from public sources or whatever. And so here on the capital allocation among the different funding sources, it means that the different percentage in the capital structure between each component, of course, here has to be defined as in any case by case, because there is no magic recipe. Each case is treated individually, and it depends on the characteristic of the project. There might be projects where the equity or debt proportion is higher than the other one, or requiring more or less public funding sources investments. And this depends from the project characteristics, of course. But in the model that we have set for you, you have now all the tool, all what you need to have this in place and to optimize and make your fundraising process the most efficient possible.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. While we are finishing, I will give some minutes in case you have any new question from the last part of Giovanni explained. Meanwhile, I will going to comment another question about the ESG metrics. Eduardo answered the question. We received a question saying that the ESG metrics this tool is calculating are very different from the ESG metrics they calculated with an energy audit. As we explained during this session, we incorporate a new scenario where you can put the two kind of metrics obtained from a different tool, from a different study. But I also want to take the opportunity of the advantage of this moment to say that from our experience, any project in our life, this kind of municipality projects, energy transition projects, or all the projects in the world related to other topics, in the end, any project in the world, the output of the project, the final output of the project in the reality is the output you planned in the beginning, some years before. The same is happening with the ESG metrics. Any ESG metric we saw in our life that was calculated in the planning stage of the project are the real ESG metrics that a project obtained in the end of the project. All of these metrics, ESG metrics, financial plans, the outputs we are calculating are trying to give an overview to us, first of all to us for our project, to see if we are in the right way or not, to provide an overview to potential funding sources, as they could be investors, a bank, or a public authority, about how we are going to develop our project. And of course, every bank, every investor, every public authority that is going to give you a grant knows that all the outputs you're explaining are part of a plan, and all of them know that in the reality, when you finish the project, the numbers will be different. The same is happening with the ESG metrics. The ESG metrics, there are too many ways to calculate ESG metrics, depending if you go to an energy audit company A and you go then to an energy company B, you are going to obtain different ESG metrics, because I saw these examples in my life. Different companies analyzing the same things, obtaining different outputs, different planning for the ESG metrics. So in this regard, we encourage you to use this tool. And of course, as I'm repeating every time, as I'm saying every time, if you have your own tool, your own audits, those are complementary. Those are complementary. And if you are using them to show it to investors in your investor deck, in your business plan, and if you show that you have different tools, you are using different tools to obtain the outputs, you have different scenarios, show it to them. Show it to them. It's a positive topic for the people interested in your project. And after this short speech, sorry, I have a private question. It could be interesting to know for each investment sectors, which one is the scenario more applicable in an indicative way. I think we can answer this question through email, because we will need time to explain different scenarios, different sectors. But of course, after this session, we will provide you with this presentation. You will have access to the recording of the session, and also you will have access to the new version of the Excel-based tool. And also, last but not least, I remind you again, if you have more questions, you can send an email to Dora, to the team of EUCF facilities, to Giovanni, to me, to Eduardo. For example, if your questions are more related with the organization of these communities of practice, you can focus your email. I continue sharing the screen. Yes. You can send your email to Dora if you have questions regarding the operational management of these communities of practice. In case you will have questions regarding the use of the Excel-based tool, or you want to provide us with different feedback or with your Excel-based tool to analyze it, you can send an email to Giovanni, to Eduardo, or to me, Álvaro. I have a message here from Dora, and please, in case you upload your Excel-based tool on FMP, send also a notification by email so we can support and check it promptly. Yes. Do we have more questions? No, sorry, because we are a bit late, but it was kind of a tricky session, this one, because we are working with too many municipalities, with too many different scenarios, too many project funding structures, but we wanted to provide you a complete session where you will understand, where you are understanding all the important topics, all the questions you raised in the last 2 months, but also we wanted to provide you with enough information to understand the tool, because some things were not clear in the last webinar, to understand the updates, and also to show you that the updates are only to help you, to provide you more information and to be more accurate. And also we wanted to use this session to explain you and to let you know how to deal with different business cases, because as I said before, it's more than probably that if you are now in the first stage of your project with the business plan, it's more than probably that in some months you will change your project funding structure depending on the situation, depending of the future of your relationship with the banks, with grants, with your own departments in your municipalities. So thank you very much, Dylan. You help us with your questions. He's saying thank you in the chat. Thank you very much, all of you, for attending this workshop. Thank you very much, Francisco, Anke, Giovanni, and Eduardo. And we hope to see you soon through email or in the next communities of practice. Bye.
Thank you, Álvaro.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Bye.
Goodbye to everybody.
Bye.